Are you lost in the chaotic whirlwind of day-to-day busyness? Do you yearn for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life? Welcome to Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose, the podcast dedicated to empowering women on their journey of self-discovery and finding their true purpose through their own story. I'm your host, Brenda Simmons. Welcome, my friends, to the podcast. Last Monday, Curtis Morley, he talked about the path from victim to victor to vessel. This is a path of conscious choice and one that makes us stronger emotionally, mentally, and physically. I want to talk about some natural laws, some laws of nature that help us to move from that victim to victor to vessel. It is a known fact that strength only comes through resistance, right? So we talk about this all the time. That's why people go and lift weights, because they build muscles, they build physical strength by having that resistance of the weights. However, the path of least resistance is the natural path that nature wants to take, including our behaviors. So let's talk a little bit about this path of least resistance and how we can work with it to help us to find greater strength. Energy in nature always flows in the path of least resistance. So think about this. So you've got wind, right? Wind is created from the hot air that rises and the cold air that falls. And when you get that fluctuation, you get air movement or wind. And this happens every single day. You see electricity. Electricity will do the same thing. It will always flow the path of least resistance. That's why we have things called resistors. If you want to manipulate where that flow goes, you have to put in a resistor to guide that flow, because it will always choose the path of least resistance. Let's look at water. When you've got, I don't know if you did this when you were kids, but you stand at a little hill and you pour some water down and you kind of watch how the water flows. And that new flow is always going to, again, follow the path of least resistance. And it's going to sometimes pause because it's creating a new path, and it's going to feel which direction is going to give them the least resistance. So it happens all the time, every day. That water, typically, like say that you've got, do it again and again. Well, it's going to follow that same path over and over again. The flow is greatest, or the amount, or the resistance is the least in places where it has flowed before. So the same thing happens inside of our brains. When we are born, our brains are immediately, they start to create these synapses. And they're doing this in the womb, right? They're just going. And these synapses are chemical signal pathways in a similar fashion to the water creating these different pathways. And it's going to create the path of least resistance inside of our brain, these chemical pathways. And it starts from, like I said, from inside the womb as we are developing. So these synapses, they're what help us to have control over our movements, like our fingers and our legs. They help us to learn how to walk and how to feed ourselves and how to talk, and over and over and over again. And then those pathways are reinforced every single time we use it. These then will build on each other to create more complex neural pathways. So think going from, lying on your back to rolling over to crawling to walking to running to jumping, and, all of those complexities. Those pathways are always first going to go through what has already been created and then be built upon them. So it is a fact of nature still that humans will find the path of least resistance in our own behavior as well. We constantly look for ways that will give us the greatest perceived benefit for the least amount of work. And I say perceived very intentionally, because the benefit actually isn't always the greatest in some cases. And I'm going to get into that more in a little bit. So sometimes we'll even look for the least amount of work, because that perceived benefit of avoiding work is greater than any other benefit that we can think of. in that moment. So, ironically, like I said before, sometimes because of the way our brains are wired, the path of least resistance is actually less efficient and requires more work. So, it's easier and it has less resistance because it's just what we've done. It's the pathway that we've always done, the way things we've always done things. And so to make a change can feel like it's more resistant, even though in the long run, it could greatly benefit us to make that change. So let's look at some examples. Let's look at our phone usage. When we get a notification, many, especially, and I noticed this especially when smartphones were new and people would get notifications literally ad nauseum. But let's say we've got our phone, we're getting notifications, but we're trying to focus on something and something that's really important that really needs our attention. Well, that natural pathway is to look at those notifications over and over again. However, it is massively less efficient and it creates far more work for you because of the time that it takes you to get back into refocusing on your task at hand. Here's another example. It is really easy because, especially if you've done it over and over and over again, if this is a pattern for you, to blame somebody else for a situation, whatever it may be, than to take responsibility for that situation yourself. However, this creates far more work for you in the long run because it reinforces a mindset and physical and mental patterns that are really difficult to overhaul later on and to repair. So the key is figuring out, okay, if going to these paths of least resistance is the natural way, if that's what we're going to always lean towards, how can we use that concept to create solutions to problems and to actually even strengthen us? So, I want to give you a few examples of where this actually happened. So, the first one was the Chicago River. I went to Chicago, when was it? A couple years ago. And I was looking out over the Chicago River and I was like, wait a second. The usually big rivers are going to flow into a bigger body of water. Yet the Chicago River actually flows away from Michigan Lake. And so I was looking that up and I just was like, that is so bizarre. Like, why does that even happen? Well, I learned that late in the 1800s, the the engineers reversed that flow. And they did that because the animal and the human waste became so massive that both the river and the lake became horribly, horribly polluted. And the surface oils were so thick on the water. And I'm not talking like crude oil. Like we always think oils on water that's got to be from gasoline or crude oil. Not that. It's like that human and animal waste. Like think animal oils. That's the kind of waste we're talking about. So incredibly smelly, incredibly just super toxic. But there were so many oils on top of the water that in the Chicago fire in 1871, the water actually lit on fire. So just imagine how horrible that pollution was. So, and not only that, but those pollutions caused massive outbreaks of contaminated water illnesses like cholera and typhoid fever. So what engineers did, they were looking at it and they were like, how can we solve this problem? And obviously you have to take this into the context of how they solved problems back then. So they thought, okay, obviously our mode of transportation for waste is through this waterway. So how can we use this waterway in a way that will get rid of the waste rather than just let it sit here? And so what they did is they built a 28-mile canal from the Chicago River to the Des Plaines River, and they actually reversed the flow of the Chicago River starting in about 1900. And so it pushed all of the pollutants instead of into the river and then into Lake Michigan, it pushed it out towards the Mississippi River and then down into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, obviously, that's creating other issues. I'm fully aware of that. But again, remember the context of what was available to them. And we're not going to get into what happened downstream. So, because that was a problem too. But today, if you go to Chicago, you'll notice that there are locks and blocks that block the Lake Michigan from completely draining out to the Mississippi and then out into the Gulf of Mexico. So what happened then? So just to summarize, engineers created a new system. They implemented this system that made a new path of least resistance, and that solved their problem. Okay, so let's look at another example. Let's say you've got, and this happens all the time. There's a business, you get a new boss, and the boss comes in and they're like, why are we doing the systems the way we're doing them? It's totally, he can see that there is a better way of doing things. And so the boss implements new systems. Well, what happens? People resist that change because that's not what they've done. That's not the path of least resistance. But through the encouragement and the admonition of the new boss, they end up learning how to do the new system. They realize, oh, it is way more efficient. We can totally do this. And because of that, the business improves, and because those systems are better. So what that boss did again was created a different structure so that it created a new path of least resistance that was adopted. So there's a guy, his name is Robert Fritz. He wrote a book exactly about this and how you can take a situation, you can create a different structure, and that will create a new path of least resistance. And so his book is called The Path of Least Resistance, Learning to Become the Creative Force of Your Own Life. I have not read it. It's on my books to read, but as I was researching and kind of reading different synopses of what he wrote, this is exactly what he's talking about, creating these new systems so that you have a new pathway of least resistance. So the question then is, can we then use this natural law to trick our brain into improving in a way that you desire without making it feel super hard, right? And it definitely is a paradigm shift. I mean, when I was first coming up with this, I had in the back of my mind, oh, I want to talk about, strength through resistance, and you have to forge this path. But as I really started to look at what is natural and what are we going to tend to gravitate to, I realized, oh, it's counterintuitive. Like, it takes a lot of personal force and motivation, and motivation is you get tired quickly if you're only running on motivation alone. And so if we can create these systems where your flow is a lot easier, then that is going to help you succeed far more in the long run than just by grit force all the time. So here's some tips to remember on how to do this. Number one, remember again that the path of least resistance is often the one that is repeated the most often. So think of these waterways, right? Water is going to flow where it has flowed for years and years and years and years. And it's going to do that because it has carved that way, that pathway for itself. So when we apply that, you think, okay, well, if I'm repeating something, if I'm repeating these new systems often enough, well, pretty soon it becomes a habit. Pretty soon it just becomes a natural flow of this is the way I do it. And you think about it, okay, I think a really good example of this is waking up early in the morning. If your alarm is set for a certain time, let's say 6 a.m., and you snooze it often and repeatedly, your body is not going to get up. Like, you're training your body to snooze, right? But if you get up and that alarm goes off and you get up every single day, what happens is so fascinating. Pretty soon you're going to start waking up before that alarm because it's become easy for your body to follow through on this habit because you've trained it. This is what I'm going to do. Even if it's I'm going to get up and move myself to a different room, you're still getting up, right? So this is an example of creating a system that creates a new path of least resistance, and your body will flow with that if you do it often enough. So just remember that that new system is going to be reinforced every time you do it. So repeat it often, but also be very judicious on what that new pathway is. So, for example, I had this habit of getting up and going to the refrigerator. And it wasn't even necessarily um, something that I consciously did. Sometimes I need a break. The first thing I did was go to the refrigerator, right? that that's not really a healthy choice for me because and I will just snack, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing. And so you have to be very conscious and very aware of what you are doing repeatedly so that you make sure that you are making the paths of least resistance that are the right ones for you. So just keep in mind that a temporary increase in resistance will often create a better path of least resistance for you in the future. Okay, so number 2 tip to remember. When you are attempting to create change, find ways to only decide once. For example, many of you know that I am training for this triathlon sprint that's coming up in June. And so one of the things that I did was I took the entire workout and I put it in my calendar every single day. I just took a half an hour and I put every day, this is what I'm going to do. And that has been an absolute game changer for me because I don't have to think, what am I doing today? How am I going to fit it in? I don't have to keep finding it and looking it up and where's it going to be and then look at the date. I mean, I did that once and I put it in my calendar so I can look at my calendar and I go, okay, today I am riding my bike 45 minutes and I'm swimming for 25 minutes. And so it just makes it so much easier. Then all I have to do is go, okay, this is my schedule today. This is where I'm fitting it in. So much easier than having to look up that schedule every single day. Another example of deciding only once is having a menu. I'm so bad at this. So bad at this. It's something that I want to improve on. But but I know that when I have a menu ready, it's so much easier to plan for actually making dinner and knowing what we're going to make and having all the ingredients and so have that dinner menu. Another thing that I have found super helpful is to put your phone in another room. So I talked about getting up early in the morning. I actually put my alarm, I keep my alarm on. My phone is on in another room so I can hear it. But to turn it off, I have to get up. And so that forces me to get up. So this one's kind of a twofer for me because I don't have the temptation of scrolling at night or in the morning in bed. And it forces me to get out of bed. So 2 goals that I'm accomplishing just by putting my phone in another room. So you see what I mean by finding ways to only decide once. And once that system is in place, then you will follow through on it because you've already decided, you've already implemented the system. Okay, number 3 on the tips to remember is we've got to lose the reins of perfectionism. Sometimes we have this all or nothing attitude, but what really happens when you do is it actually gives you nothing because we either get paralyzed or we get demotivated or, things will happen where you just think, oh, well, I can't do it anyway, so I may as well not do it all. So an all or nothing attitude always will give you nothing. So rather than having that kind of mindset, try all or something. So you can do it all and you can be great at it, or you can do part of it. And part of it is great because part of it is learning and part of it is putting in the repetition and the pathways of getting it done. So lose the reins of perfectionism. Number 4 is to surrender control. And this one has been a really, really big one for me because, man, I really like to hold on to that control and I like to figure out how it's going to be done. And if it's not my way, then there's no other way it's going to work. It feels so counterintuitive to stop trying to control things when has not been your natural pathway. Like that has been a natural path of least resistance for me, is to grasp onto that control. And so it feels very, very counterintuitive to me to release that control and rather than fighting for it all the time. However, I have found that I spend so much time worrying and so much energy on trying to figure out how to control things that either aren't mine to control or are uncontrollable, that I lose out on spending that time and energy on other places, other areas where I can control. So when I have applied this, as difficult as it has been for me, I have experienced a profound sense of relief. Like the relief it really surprised me. Like, oh, like I don't have to do this. Like, oh, I don't have this burden anymore. It really felt like this weight was taken off of me. And then I had this peace that came to me like, oh, I don't need that. And peace was that one emotion that we talked about on Monday that doesn't have a counterfeit emotion. And I thought that was so profound and so wonderful. And I have found that I have to repeat step one. I have to do that repetition over and over again to help me to completely surrender that control. But I'm telling you, it is amazing when you surrender that control and you just allow that natural force of following that flow, that path of least resistance. It is a beautiful thing because you are allowing things to come into your life that you would normally block out. It's absolutely amazing. So, and I'm not saying go for what is easiest. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying remember that our tendency is to follow what is easier. So make the system in your life such that it makes it super easy to follow that higher level system. Use this concept to tweak your schedule, to tweak your habits, tweak, whatever you're doing to make things easier for you. Each time you do it, that path is going to lead you to being stronger and stronger in new and powerful ways because you've up-leveled the system, not necessarily the end result. So when you up-level the system, then you're going to have that natural flow of path of least resistance that's going to lead you into where you want to be, which I'm going to bring this full circle is going to move us from victim to victor to vessel. And with that, I hope that you have found some value in this. Please share this with somebody that you feel that it could benefit. And remember that we are on Apple and Spotify and all of the podcast places as well as YouTube. So I always record these in video form, and so you can find those over on YouTube as well. So take care, my friends, and remember that your purpose is in your story. Until next time, bye.
Celebrate your dreams, let them take flight, for you are a star, shining bright in every step you take. Let your